Hello and welcome to India's World, where today we'll be discussing the latest developments in Maldives and how it has taken India by surprise. Last week, Friday, Maldives pushed through its free trade agreement, or the FTA, with China in a parliament session attended by only 30 out of 85 members. The haste with which the government, led by President Abdullah Yameen, decided to pass the pact is being seen as another attempt of Malé cozying up to China. Well, Yameen will be visiting Beijing in December, a reciprocal one after the first ever visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping to Maldives in September 2014. In today's episode, we'll look deeper into this growing friendship and whether China is chipping away at India's influence, not only in the island nation, but also the Indian Ocean region as well. Joining us on the panel today, we have an esteemed panel. In fact, we've got former Foreign Secretary Mr. Salman Haidar with us, strategic affairs expert and national security expert with the CPR, Bharat Karnad as well, and Director of Society for Policy Studies, retired Commodore C. Uday Bhaskar. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on India's World. Firstly, if I could come to you, Mr. Haidar, this FTA between Maldives and China, observers saying that actually India should have anticipated it, considering how close the nations have been in the past few years. But the hasteness, the urgency that Maldives showed in trying to get it passed. What do you read into it?
I find it difficult to get a proper focus on this, because there doesn't seem to have been any particular urgency in the issue itself. Countries around in this Indian Ocean region do have FTAs, more than one. We have an FTA with Sri Lanka, which has been working very satisfactorily, and where incidentally the initiative came from Sri Lanka much more than from us. But this is a trend, a regional trend, which has now caught up with Maldives and indirectly will affect us. So we have to see what it portends. It is being so close to us and being within an area that we regard as being within our own security concerns,
yes,
our security perimeter in a way. Naturally, the establishment of long-term arrangements between that country and any other is a matter of well, I won't say concern, but certainly something that we have to look at very carefully. We have to be watchful about it. And the actual volume of goods that will be released or affected by the FTA is not likely to be very large. But the presence of third parties, here in this case mainly China, on a permanent or a long-term basis in Maldives is something that is a new element, and we don't really know where it will lead.
Okay. All right. Commodore Bhaskar, Maldives presidential office's statement gave some details of the FTA. It's still a bit sketchy, but at least what we've been able to get out, is that, of course, there's going to be high duties on export of fish products. That's one of the few bits that we've been able to get, at least through reports coming in from there. But interestingly, it also says that the Maldivian government has extended invitations to establish FTAs with countries including Japan, US, UK, and also EU nations, but no mention of India there. Yeah. What do we read into that?
Well, I think there is a subtext to my mind, which is really the politics that is driving this whole initiative. Because there are two things here. One is, my sense is that the Maldivian government, led by Mr. Yameen, has pushed this so quickly, even though they did not have the appropriate quorum as far as the parliament was concerned, in preparation for the visit to Beijing. So you can see that there is this attraction that Mr. Xi Jinping and Beijing have for the current regime in the Maldives, in Malé. And the reciprocal part to my mind is that China has also identified Maldives as a very important entity, largely because of its geography. If you recall, when Mr. Xi Jinping took over office in 2014, this was one of the first foreign tours that he embarked upon. Maldives is back or beyond as far as China is concerned.
Yes.
And this is well before the current coronation, if you will, of Mr. Xi Jinping. And he visits, and that's largely, as I said, because China had prioritized the Indian Ocean and they had identified Maldives and made various investments. Most recently, they have also now dropped anchor in Djibouti. So I would say that the engagement with Maldives from the Chinese side is part of a much larger game plan. And where I think India has been found wanting, and this goes back, I think, to some of the developments as far as India Maldives are concerned, that yes, now we're all talking about this FTA as surprise, surprise.
Yes.
I imagine, I'm saying this from the outside as an analyst, that the moment Mr. Xi Jinping went to Maldives in 2014, India's mandarins should have been looking at this very closely, the PMO, the national security guys, the diplomats and the professionals.
Yes.
And if need be, we should have given Maldives whatever they wanted as incentive, as inducement, give them a preferential treatment. I mean, as Mr. Haidar pointed out, the trade volumes we are talking about are very small.
Yes.
So if we have invested in Afghanistan
Yes.
for a larger strategic objective, my reading as an analyst is, I think we dropped the ball.
Okay.
That's my reading.
All right. And yes, of course, when Prime Minister Modi did visit some of the nations in the Indian Ocean region, the reason that, at least at the moment, was being said why he dropped Maldives from the list was because of the political turmoil that was going on in the country there, and hence he just went to Seychelles, Mauritius, among the nations. But since then, there has been no attempt also by anyone from the Indian side, at least among the top dignitaries, forget the Prime Minister, but even among the top dignitaries, to go and reach out to Maldives. Because as far as this FTA is concerned, reports were saying that apparently the workings really of the deal were pretty much sealed in September itself. So if India wanted to intervene, they could have perhaps reached out as well.
I think what the Indian government did not anticipate was that Abdullah Yameen, President Yameen, would push through this with just 30 people, representatives in parliament, while he kept out the rest of them by military force.
Yes.
Now, this is the sort of thing that perhaps tells on our intelligence, whatever it is that we pick up or don't in Malay. And again, the absence of what I call strategic sensibility in our foreign policy, generally. This is a perennial problem with us. It's almost an affliction that we tend to be reactive, passive, defensive, rather than proactive and, in a sense, working in distant terms, you see, having some foresight in foreign policy. So when you end up only reacting, you're awaiting something to happen before you act. Now, what are you going to do now? They have signed an agreement. Of course, it is illegal by any stretch of the imagination. There's no parliamentary stamp on it.
Yes.
With 30 people out there and the rest of the crowd being kept out. So what is the way out? Abdullah Yameen has proved a particularly difficult customer. He's a treacherous guy. Now, is it something that we should countenance? You have someone like his predecessor,
Nasheed,
whom he
yes.
imprisoned, Mr. Mohammed Nasheed, and so on, who keeps coming here and complaining about Mr. Yameen playing the ducks and drakes with Maldivian interests and with Indian interests, and playing footsie with China. Now, are we going to say, well, it's all right, we are such a big power, we don't have to worry about Maldives having China as a bedfellow? Or are we going to do something about it? Now, if you're going to play by the, Marquis or Queensberry rules and do nothing, or just maintain decorum, then what you will have is an ensconcement of China and the Maldives to our strategic and permanent disadvantage. Because China is not like some other country.
Yes.
They're going to come in full score with lots of monies and keep buying off things. They might then begin occupying the atolls and islands that are uninhabited, just not very far away from the Indian mainland. Now you have Djibouti there, Gwadar there, you have a Chinese naval presence in Maldives, and that pretty much screws India. Now, if we don't recognize any of this and keep sitting with our hands folded on our laps and talk about this, that, and the other, and just talk and talk and more talk, then we're going to have a problem. I think what we need to do is really what I've been advocating for a very long time, use strong arm tactics, because Yameen is simply not amenable to good sense or to sweet talk. What we need is maybe a contingent of the Marine Commando going in there with 2 frigates and ending this wretched rule of his. I'm sorry, but there is no other option.
Okay.
Either that or we see China permanently based in Maldives. And hereafter, dictating the Maldivian government's policies. If you want that, then that's fine. If not, then we better begin acting soon. I'm surprised that the Modi government hasn't so far done anything that is visible
Yes.
in terms of preventing such a denouement as has happened.
Yes, that seems to be the only option left for India. Mr. Haidar, do you feel so? The
Well,
Indian Ocean region, we know Sri Lanka anyway, it's under so much debt of China, and anyway there were questions that, it's chipping away the Indian influence there, whether by force or by, in kind or in cash. I mean, things are of course going haywire there as well for India. But, Maldives seems very keen as well. It doesn't even seem to be indicating any kind of friendship towards India. It's more than happy to be under the debt of China, it seems like it. And you're slowly, losing that region away. And that is a strategical point also. If you think about the Indian Ocean region, Maldives is important, that entire region, of course.
Well, Maldives is certainly important. What Bharat said about this, its location is something that obviously we have to be mindful of at any moment. That is really what it's all about. That it is a place where if an unfriendly presence should establish itself, or even not an overtly unfriendly presence, but one which is outside our own domain and one which has a different perception of how events should unfold, should be so close to us. This is a matter of concern, matter that will certainly attract a lot of attention now and in the future. But we have to be careful. Sometimes the purported cure can be worse than the problem. I mean, if we intervene in a heavy and what should we say, militarily decisive, it doesn't talk was made of 2 frigates or a frigate or something. I think it probably needs a platoon or something. It doesn't really need a large military force. So that's not the issue. The question really is, would we be seen to be correct or doing things which are within our own traditions and which would have adequate backing internationally in trying to remove a government and install someone else in the place of the deposed individual? I think these are not simple questions.
Okay.
And therefore, I would ponder. I mean, certainly we are uncomfortable with what's happened, with a sort of way in which a relationship with this with China and within our region is developing and has grown, and to react is militarily or in any other way is certainly within the possibility of and within the realm of possibility so far as we are concerned. But would this lead to complications, international complications, and also would it make the handling of Maldives more difficult and set up for ourselves a long-term problem? Because these days, I mean, you can't really expect any country to lose its own initiative in what it wishes, whatever we may think of it.
Okay.
And so I think that I would not advocate at this stage that we should plunge in.
Yes.
I think it's time for us to be concerned, to use diplomatic, and Bharat thinks perhaps quite rightly that our diplomats are useless. But anyway, that may well be the case. I don't know. But the diplomacy,
Yes.
I think, has its value,
Yes.
and that should not be forgotten. I think what is required from us in the light of what's been said and what has happened in the Maldives is much closer engagement.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. The strategy needs to change when it comes to Maldives. You know, it's a difficult a nation, because the current president, of course, has obviously not been, we've not had warm relations with him. But even the previous governments, there's always been this sense of discontent that, India acts like a big brother and we really haven't got as much as we hope to get from India. These are the kind of complaints that we've heard for years from different regimes as well. Even with Mohammed Nasheed, who claims to be a friend of India, but even he's had such complaints earlier as well. That strategy needs to change, do you think, with India?
Absolutely. I mean, Tracy, I think you really raised a very fundamental issue. And Maldives is only the most recent example because there are two issues here. One is what we have now seen in Maldives in relation to the FTA and the speed and the lack of appropriate legal and constitutional protocols. And as I said, the reason is the visit to Beijing as far as the Maldivian president is concerned. But I think India needs to strategize in a far more innovative and effective way about the entire neighborhood. Because we have a similar kind of experience, say, with Sri Lanka, where there has been a change of the politics or the regime in Sri Lanka. There was one particular family that was very close to China, and we know the whole Hambantota kind of experience and what Sri Lanka is going through just now. We've had a similar kind of example with Myanmar, where the Chinese had made very, very deep inroads into the politics of Myanmar, the military and various other aspects. Similarly, Bangladesh. So I don't think this is perhaps the most prudent kind of approach, as Mr. Haidar has pointed out, that you can't go marching in with the military and say that we'll change the regime because A, it won't be effective. And secondly, I think there's a much larger issue saying that we would then most effectively be pushing all the smaller neighbors into other laps, which I don't think is the Indian intent.
Yes.
The issue as I see it is that Chinese presence is going to grow. And that's largely because of the very deep pockets that China is able to bring to bear.
Yes.
I mean, just sticking with Maldives, you'll recollect that when we had Prime Minister Manmohan Singh going for the summit in SAARC, in Addu, just a day prior to that, China opens its first embassy in the Indian Ocean region in the Maldives. That, to my mind, was the first signal. We're talking about 2012.
Yes.
5 years ago. So my point is that I think the Indian establishment, I use the word very deliberately, that we dropped the ball on Maldives a long time ago.
Okay.
And for some reason, maybe I'm saying this because I'm a sailor, but I constantly say, please turn the map of India upside down. Have the peninsula pointing upwards and then look at where the Maldives is located and where the next 10, 20 years are going. We should have been invested in Maldives with the same kind of commitment that we showed in Afghanistan.
Yes.
The entire Afghanistan issue was rationalized $2 billion, $3 billion, saying it's strategically important for India. That's because the establishment in Delhi thinks that they have a better understanding of land borders, Himalayas and what lies beyond, and Pakistan as an entity again. But I think on Maldives, we should have used this perhaps as a template to deal with other neighbors also, where India is more persuasive. And India is able to convince both the polity and the political leadership in these countries that they should remain invested with India without giving them a binary option, saying that you have to choose us over China.
Yes.
Because I don't think that would work.
And
so maybe we need the same strategy.
Yes, and interestingly, Mr. Karnad, China has an FTA with the only other country in this region, and that is with Pakistan. So perhaps the strategy, like this story, in fact, if I could put it this way, there are three indicators. One is that India's wait and watch policy perhaps need a relook. It needs a rethink. Secondly, Maldives, of course, is playing its political games. But thirdly, it's a very aggressive China who's wanting to push things very fast. And as long as it gets, it preys upon a particular nation and is trying to get things done.
Are you looking for and pound of flesh as the phrase?
Yeah, actually. And, they're trying to get things done and they're getting things done. And in that sense, maybe India needs to relook and reassess what it needs to do, not just with these countries, but also how China is treating them and, how it's playing them. And, can India then re-strategize itself?
Well, look, that's all we end up doing.
Yes.
As I said, we talk, strategize, you see, nothing happens. We are not karma yogis, we are talk yogis. You see, we just talk. And everybody is sick and tired of it, honestly, in the neighborhood. We don't deliver on our promises. And it's not just Maldives. Please, what is the common complaint amongst all our neighbors? It is that we don't deliver on our promises. And these are neighbors as far north as Central Asian republics, whom we have promised this, that, and the other, and have never delivered. I don't know whether it's MEA that's to blame or not. Maybe there's some other agency that's handling these affairs. But I assume that somewhere down the line, the government of India has to take the responsibility. And if it's driven top down by the Prime Minister, then so be it. Let the PMO drive it. But something has to be done in terms of delivery once the promises are made, and very expedient action to deliver on promises. One other thing to pick up on Salman's, I think, poo-pooing the military option, as it were. The fact of the matter is, some years back, when Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha was the Commander-in-Chief, Flag Officer Commander-in-Chief, Western Naval Command, during his tenure, the Mali government, the same Abdullah Yameen government, was talking about leasing an island or two just south of our Lakshadweep Islands, 19 kilometers or 19 miles. What did Shekhar Sinha do? He sent off 2 frigates, and that was the end of it. I mean, that really was the end of it. Mali stopped right there and then from going ahead, proceeding with whatever Yameen had in mind by way of leasing those islands to the Chinese. Now, what the Chinese were going to do with that piece of real estate, mid-ocean, we don't know. But it's reasonable to assume they were going to set up perhaps a radar, some surveillance, whatever it is. That stopped. So what I'm trying to say is, I think we should get off a high horse of being, responsible nation and so on and so forth. And we seem to be the only people, the only country in the entire, amongst the countries that count. I'm not talking about small little countries that don't matter. But amongst the larger countries, we seem to be the only ones who want to act responsibly, whatever that means. No other country acts responsibly if what is at stake is the national interest.
Yes.
If it's the national interest that's in peril, that is in any way undermined, you go ahead and act. And you tell whichever government is in power, well, look, be generous all you want. Yes, have an FTA. Give them complete access to the Indian market. That you must do. Well, we can do that with Pakistan. We can do that with Bangladesh. We should do that with all our neighbors to get them out of the Chinese grasp. I mean, after all, Pakistanis are complaining as much about the CPEC, about CPEC being a new East India company that's going to colonize Pakistan. And that's a reasonable prospect, because Pakistan is in no position to give back the loans at stake to after realizing the CPEC and all the other things that they're going to build. Mali is in even less of a position to pay back the Chinese.
Yes.
So the payback the Chinese expect is in kind, like in having whole atolls given to them, whole island bases given to them. So this is what we have to prevent.
Is there a middle ground? Is there some way where India does put its foot down, shows Maldives, I mean, not to the extent that, of course, is being suggested here. Maybe if they want to do it, they go ahead, use some scare tactics. But at the same time, also try and show them that it's not just China that's going to help you develop. We have always been there for you and we continue to stay there. And is that the message that needs to go through as well?
Well, we have to find the middle ground. We have to create middle ground. If it is not readily available, I think that is necessary. India has made its image, its interest have been expressed in terms of it being the provider of security within its own region, because that gives it the backing and support of various countries with which we are indissolubly tied. And our armed forces, as Bharat has just mentioned, have been engaged in these near waters and have successfully expressed in India's interest. But if they start becoming the purveyors of insecurity, of having shots going astray,
yes,
and that sort of business, are trying to terrify people, well, I don't think that is a long-term strategy that can prevail.
All right. Commodore Bhaskar, is there any other solution that we can see? Because Yes, I mean, in that sense, that is, of course, a bigger issue, which perhaps, we can't be discussing about in detail here. But apart from that also, as far as putting pressure goes, can it be economically? Because one grouse, of course, of observers here in India is that, India gives donations to all these nations, but China gives loans. And perhaps that's where, things differ. And that's where, it's easier for China to put its finger on a particular country and say, now show me, pay us in kind if it has
again,
to be.
Tracy, I think the pattern is that China has been investing in the political leadership of these smaller countries and offering them certain incentives for the short term, which could lead to political/electoral benefit. We saw that in the case of Sri Lanka.
Yes.
We saw it in the case of Nepal, Bangladesh, as also now in the Maldives. And more importantly, I think the Indian option really should be to create what you had outlined, a more holistic and effective strategy, which is for the whole region. Now, when Prime Minister Modi had visited the islands, if you remember, he spoke about Sagar. That was security and growth for all in the region. So this is how I think India needs to pitch itself, to say that, as I said, it is the more viable alternative to what China is providing, which really means to have a sustained kind of effort. Now, I constantly draw this example of Afghanistan saying, which is, again, a high visibility kind of Indian symbol of going outside India and making a very sizable investment for the long term. We haven't done that for the ocean, the islands. And I think that's what we need to do as part of a long-term strategy to say that India is your more viable partner, largely because India is a responsible state.
Yes.
And if you remember when India spoke about the OBOR, one of the points that was made is that India respects and is seeking an equitable partnership, not the kind of predatory economic and fiscal arrangements that China has entered into. I think that's our strong point, and perhaps we should push that.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. But this is definitely a sentiment that also emerged when we did an episode a few weeks back, in fact, on Sri Lanka as well, and how China is, of course, putting its pressure there. Do watch that episode of India's World too if you get time. Of course, your feedback is very much appreciated. To send it in at indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. That's it at the moment from me. Thank you so much for joining us.